Good morning. Welcome to Carlie's Couch.
Hola.
It's Lextopia.
CC Fierce at your service.
I haven't done that in a long time. Wow.
That's actually part of my speech therapy, so I've been doing a lot of.
Wow, that's funny. Got you moving that throat.
Oh, God. No pause today. I don't know if Lex ever has a pause, but that's probably why we friends.
Yeah, this happens way too often.
And she talk about me.
That's why I be getting in trouble with some people because I'm like, dang, I can't, you be trying to talk to everybody in the same way. And it's like, whoops, forgot where I was at.
Ooh. And working with kids is the worst because
yeah.
I can't be super childish.
But then they know what stuff is anyway. So it's like, you could do it, but it's like, I shouldn't.
It was like one time somebody said something off the wall, like completely like ridiculously off the wall. And then she looked at me, she said, I know you want to say that's what she said. And I just bust out laughing. I was like, you're in 7th grade. Chill.
Come on, man. Be a good influence for these kids. Golly. And today we're talking about religion. Way to start it out. Look, where you at?
God.
Sheesh. First, we're going to start out in prayer. Just kidding. Although that sounds like something Carlie might think about doing. Don't get any ideas. We read last week a review that we got. We got another one we want to read. And again, we're reading these so that you can see how easy it is to go online, type something up real quick, hit enter. And we also want to shout you out because we appreciate what you're leaving and appreciate that effort because we know it's easy to just listen. It's a little bit more to actually subscribe. It's a little bit more to get on the email list. It's a little bit more to actually sit down and write some stuff out. I feel you.
Yeah, you commit a little bit to us.
Yeah, usually, people just have something to say when they are just upset, but we appreciate all the good reviews we've gotten. We have one recently. It says real issues, real solutions, 5 stars.
Hey.
And they say Carlie and Lex do a great job of taking on real issues and offering practical solutions. I enjoy the humor they add to serious topics and their dialogue. Oh, I appreciate that.
I appreciate that too. And I'm glad because when we first started this, it's like we don't just want to be out here talking mindlessly about things. It's like we want to help offer some practical solutions or at least learn something. Mm-hmm. And so I'm glad that that's working out.
Yeah. The best podcast that I've listened to, I stick to is because I get something out of it. So whether you are entertained by us or actually just learning something is up to you. But we try to put some things in there that you can get because I'm learning every time we do something, honestly.
Yeah.
So to that then, the topic that we have lined up for today is based on the idea of tradition. So we want to talk about traditions and what that looks like. Are they good or bad? And then really diving into religion as one of those things that tends to be a tradition. And so kind of how we balance that out of developing our own spirituality and what that looks like and how that is a part of tradition and how we were raised. So I say all that because I don't want it to necessarily be like this is episode just on religion, but it's more so around the why do you do the things that you do. But I thought religion was a good place to use that topic just because a lot of people, if you ask them about what they practice, it's, the same thing their parents may have practiced and their parents before them and back on and so on. And so I think it's very interesting as we talk about intent and all of the things we do to think about that as a space where we are and have intention around how we practice, what we practice, and why.
I think that's been one of the biggest lessons I've learned as an adult is actually pausing, why do I do that? Or why is this thing such a big part of my life? Mm-hmm. And just questioning everything.
And then where does that come? What do you tend to go back to when it's why do I do this thing?
A lot of it is just what I grew up around or saw when I was growing up, what I was socialized. Here's a very practical example. So whenever I first moved to California, I walked into a lot of doors because I was used to men opening doors for me. I'm not from here. And in Texas, in Oklahoma, men will open doors. Not even just men, but most people will open a door for you. Out here, child, everybody, I ran into so many doors and I was like, hold on. And at first I was irritated because I was like, that's so rude. Why isn't that person, not even just men, but why wouldn't they just hold the door for me? And I'm like, Carlie, that's an unrealistic expectation based on where you're from. They don't actually have to do any of those things. But it was a quick turnaround for myself. I still appreciate it, but it's also still weird to me. Even I'll be whenever I was in business school, I remember I was carrying a whole bunch of stuff, like this box, and I was like walking, and not only did nobody offer to help me, nobody even opened the door for me. And so I was like kicking the little handicap thing to open the door. But I was just like, that is so interesting, because this would not have happened where I'm from.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, why do I have these beliefs? Where did they come from? And also, I can't get upset at other people for not falling in line with my expectations on how I was raised.
And so that sounds like a really good example of like a cultural tradition. And then when sometimes when we say culture and cultural, we're thinking, oh, somewhere in Asia, somewhere, or Australia. But there's so many within the U.S. as far as South, North, like where you're from. There's so much within cities, what side of town you're from. There's so many different cultural aspects that have gone into our upbringing. I think for me, I probably agree that that's where most of my traditions come from as well. The things that I do come from or stem from the environment I grew up in. They stem from my parents, who I spent the most time with and watching. And so when it comes to religion, I grew up in a household where we were at church Sunday school, then Sunday service, then night service, then Wednesday night, VBS in the summer, vacation Bible school for you heathens. Just kidding. And so like, or when I was homeschooled in middle school, like my biggest friend group was like the youth group, and like doing all the activities with them and going places and participating in lots of programming and stuff like that. And so I grew up like really in a devout home. And they're Christian, and specifically went to Church of Christ. So every building we went to, like it had to say like wherever the location, Church of Christ. So that's me, and that's how I grew up. And so even through high school, college, if my parents were going to church, like I was going to church, like I went to church with them. And even in college, because I went to school about an hour away, I still had really good ties with everybody at the church that we were going to. So I would still, somebody would pick me up on Sundays to go. And so I still get to see my parents a lot of those Sundays as well. And it wasn't until like I moved to DC and I moved away from North Carolina that then all of that started to change a little bit more as far as my actual attendance and going. But my beliefs changed like way before. I think sometime towards junior year of college, that's when they started changing. But yeah, I did all of that because of my family. What does your religious kind of upbringing look like?
So I went to a Christian school. It was non-denominational, but a Christian school from the time I was 3 till the time I was 13. And so it was like a small school. It was like 500 people from pre-K all the way to 12th grade. So you knew everybody. And always there, like would go there, went to church like every Sunday. We always had like Wednesday Bible study at church or at school, which was church in general. We like said the pledge in the morning to the U.S. flag, the Christian flag, and the Bible. And
not y'all had a pledge to the Bible. Who made that up?
Definitely did. I don't know. I should probably Google it. But we definitely had a pledge to all that stuff. Like you capitalize G like on your papers, or you get stuff like taken, like points taken off, like you memorize scriptures. So for as long as I can remember, religion per se has been a huge part of my life in my upbringing and shaped a lot of things. But I like that my mom always gave me space to ask questions, which I don't think a lot of people who grow up in very religious homes have the space to do. And also, like, for example, she didn't make me get baptized when I was little. She said, I want you to make the decision whenever you get older, and that's up to you. She's like, I'm not going to force you to do anything, which I also think kind of shaped who I am, too, and how I view different things. But then I went to public school in middle school, and I just realized, like, how different it is. But I'm really grateful because going from a very small school, when my class averaged about 10 to 12 people, so you knew everybody in their families, to a huge school and graduating with over 400, like it just helped me ease into social situations and be able to go to a bigger college and things. So that's kind of what mine looks like.
So your mom didn't like baptize you and kind of take control of that as a child, but did you decide at some point to do that yourself? And was that still under the guise of that's kind of all you knew?
I decided to get baptized. I was 22, and I decided to get baptized. I got baptized, but it wasn't all that I knew. I had done a lot of research on other religions. That was like one of my not my minors, but like whenever I was in middle school, like 7th grade, you got to research at the Christian school other things that you want to do. And I wanted to read about other religions and see how they were and like how they were formed and seeing the correlation. And so I had a lot of other questions that were sometimes frowned upon by the teachers and things there. But I made the decision. It wasn't all that I knew, but I still hadn't expanded and questioned as much as I have now into religion.
Okay. Looking back, I don't know if regret is the right word, but do you look back at your upbringing or the religious aspects that you were exposed to and feel some kind of way about any of it?
Yeah, I do actually feel some kind of way, but it's not because of what it was. Like, I think I had, like, because my mom let me question things and let me learn, and it wasn't just like, this is the way it is, you don't ask questions. Like, like I said, I feel like a lot of people in that background have. I think it was more free for me, and it bothers me now because I look at how closely, at least in the U.S., religion can be tied with white supremacy in the sense that there's nothing else, like the way that they shut down other cultures and anything else that seems like it might disagree with what they say or even like go against it. And I start looking at all those teachers and all those people and all of those systems, and it kind of just makes me angry. Yeah.
The way it's used a lot of times, the way religion can be used.
The way that religion is weaponized against people, especially people of color. And how anything that's outside of their scope of religion is wrong and the devil and blah, blah, blah. Like, that stuff makes me really angry.
Yeah, but truth is truth, right?
Yeah, but what do you mean in the sense of what I just said?
Well, I just say that because it's interesting because when you start to speak about religion, especially with Christianity, there are Christians who can say like, believe what you want to believe. But then at the same time, well, if you believe this thing and you believe what this book says, then is the truth not truth? Do they have the right to say, like, if this is what I believe, this is the truth, then that can't be the truth?
Yeah, but I also, it's like, okay, so if I'm trying to find statistics to say that I'm the greatest person in the whole world, and I ask my mom, 100% of statistics are going to tell me that I'm the greatest person in the world. That's the one person that I ask. And so you can find data to enforce the things that you believe, whether it's religion or anything outside of religion in general. And I feel like not enough, what is the word? There's like two ways you can look at things, like taking them very literally or like looking at how they were in the times and using your deductive reasoning to figure out what that actually meant. So for example, in the Bible, it's like, oh, okay, well, a woman shouldn't be a pastor or a preacher. You can look at that very literally, or looking at like what the time frame was and different things. And I just don't like how people always use religion, not people always, but a lot of people use religion just to enforce those beliefs to keep other people down and out of certain situations to continuously benefit them.
Okay.
Long-winded way to say, yes, I guess you can say that truth is truth, but I think there's a universal truth and each person has their own truth, and sometimes those things are not in alignment.
Okay. How has your practice changed over time? And like why? What were the things so you said you were able to kind of question your parents at a young age. I didn't have any reason to question anything, I don't think. There wasn't any reason for me to be like, okay, well, why this or that? Like, again, I learned that this is what it is. And it wasn't until I was in college that I was exposed to different things, and that made me do more research then. So for you, what is it that made you ask questions in the first place?
Well, what were you exposed to? Sorry, now that I'm like, that made you ask questions.
So in my story, when I was a junior in when I was a junior in college, I was exposed to people who believed that the Old Testament has way more validity than a lot of the Christian churches say. So, there's a lot of churches that are like, okay, that's the old way, this is the new. And then it's almost like we just use the Old Testament just for the stories and like nothing else, if that makes sense. But then for many who are like, I met a lot of people who practiced a lot of the practices within like the Torah and Judaism because they don't see it as, oh, that's all cut out, but that it continues, and that there are some things that are continued to do because Jesus actually did like certain things, right? Like he was a Jew and he did certain things, and that those are still things that should be done, or that you should still eat a certain way, or that you should still do certain ceremonies or certain holidays, things like that, while still believing that, yes, he died for your sins and all of these things, but like it didn't take away from the fact that he still did all of those older things. So that was one of them, which led me to do more study around Old Testament. And I took Aramaic and I took Biblical Hebrew, and I learned how to read the text originally. And then so the more I could read the text, the more I realized things like that were misinterpreted in the Bibles, and even simple things, like not even heavy things, but there's a story about a woman who got on a donkey and she farted. Like in the text, like if you read it in the way that it's read, like she farted, and it's said in that way. But because of maybe the context of the time when they wrote the Bible, that was something so rude and vulgar that it's changed to like, it says something else, like all like flowery or whatever, but it doesn't even sound like that's what happened. But it's like little things like that where you're like, well, now I'm realizing that there's so much context and there's so much of influence around who's interpreting and who's deciding what's a good thing and what's a bad thing, that I'm like, I can't really even take this book seriously, even in understanding how pieces were put together, even in understanding that certain parts were kept out or put in so that certain people can have the ability to divorce their people or their wife, but that women couldn't do certain things, but that there's so many more texts also. And so learning a lot of those things, language, people, doing your own research about, well, what else is even out there that could have been here, but like that was kept out or for whatever, and understanding with the times the real reasons why. And like you said, I learned that so much of it wasn't just manipulated from the beginning, that now it's hard for me to take any of it seriously. So for me, those are the things that changed to make me reread. Have you ever read the Bible? So to make me like keep like reading through, like I've read through the whole thing, which is also funny to me because there's a lot of Christians who haven't read the whole collection of books. So it's like, how is this your life? Like, and then, on Facebook back in the day, people used to put on their books and like everybody's like the Bible, or on Black Planet or whatever, like the Bible. And it's like, yo, have you ever read the whole thing? Like most people have not. And if you have not, that's not a thing to shame you, but it's like you're basing your whole life around something that you haven't read. And to me, that's interesting. And so for me, I enjoy conversation around religion and why people do what they do and how they do it, because I want to understand, well, what have you learned or what do you know? But then it's discouraging because I tend to find that most people don't know, and that they are doing because that's what they've done. And they had not, whether they've been exposed or not. And then, of course, there's people who can be exposed to a new idea and want to dive into it and understand it. And then there's people who can, we'll just shut it down and say, no, like that's not it. And then we very easily use the word faith to be like, okay, it doesn't matter about science, or it doesn't matter about this or that or that or that or that or this or that, because faith, and I'm supposed to believe it.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. And I always wondered, because I knew you were very well read and understand. That's so cool that you know so many languages. It just further proves my theory that you're a spy. But
like bigger things, like when you said capitalizing the G in God, and I'm like, if we're so into why God matters, or even Jesus, why do we even call him Jesus? You know what I mean? Like there's no J.
Technically, if they're also the same part of the Holy Trinity.
Yeah,
which is a whole other thing.
Like the letter J doesn't even exist, right? So like, why, if we're so, everything we say is the name of Jesus, the name, in your name, amen. And then we don't call him the name that he was called. And it's written out for you. Like it's written in their letters. So like, why? You know what I mean? Like, why are certain things different and changed?
And that's interesting, because so when I started questioning, like at least started like, as I joined a church, an International Pentecostal Holiness Church in high school.
Sound like they was doing backflips.
So I used to praise dance. I used to mime, like all that stuff. And I realized that their tradition, their religious traditions were so vastly different from Southern Baptists, from the AME churches I had been to, from every church. And I'm like, how y'all reading the same book and coming up with all these different things? Like, I can't dance here. I'm supposed to dance here.
You can't clap in some places.
I can't clap here. I can't wear pants here. I can't. And I was just like, as a kid, I'm like, wait, what is going on?
Yeah, like, why is it so different?
Yeah, like, why is it so different? And then when I went to University of Oklahoma, Boomer Sooner, for undergrad, and Oklahoma is in the Bible Belt, y'all. And so they had this Bible display that one of our professors, I was like in this advanced Spanish course, and he like had access to it. So he took our whole class, and we got to see Bibles from like the 1200s, from the 1400s, from the 1600s. And it's so cool to see them. But then I remember they had this really big Bible that was about as big as a table from like the 1200s. We got to see it and feel it and look at all that stuff. But then like right after is like little tiny Bibles that like fit in your pockets. And I was just like, well, why are these so small? And he's like, oh, you know, that was during religious persecution. Like they were running. So they had to hurry up and write all the things down into these little books. And that's what you were saying, like getting into how the Bible was actually copied and written and who had control over those stories, and thinking that like if any one person was just like, oh, I don't like that verse, I'm going to change it. And then those are the only copies that are left.
And to even think that whoever originally wrote it was also like hundreds of years removed from the stories they were writing too. And a lot of people don't realize that. Like some of the books with the author was not writing it then. Like they weren't writing it as it's happening. This isn't their journal. This was still like years and hundreds of years later. So it's already, a lot of it is oral tradition that's being written down. Like there's so many different levels to the pieces that were written, how they were written, that, and even with what you're saying, different like versions that people read or wrote, the fact that with the very early church, people who couldn't read, so that was a power thing. Now it became a power because I can read these scriptures and I can tell you what to do and I can tell you what this says and you have to do it. And so they're in control of people in that way. And, you know, I learned that a lot of religion is around control, or a lot of it around Christianity, not in the same way as a lot of other religions. They even have the slave Bible, where it was a version of the Bible that was given to African-American slaves that did not have Exodus in it, did not have the story of Moses in it, did not have a lot of things. But then I also was like, all right, they were singing Wade in the Water. So like they had to have heard something or knew something, but they would give them misinformation and call it religion and call us as like, we're helping you and we're teaching you. And it wasn't that way. So all of those things I think make you question. And then I think it's fine to question that and then say, well, I believe this, but why? Is all I'm interested in with people. Like what things do you believe and then why? Because a lot of times the more read a person is or researched within these topics, I've always found that they have a more lenient view towards religion and towards spirituality, and a more open view towards other religions and other people's practices as well. And so that's what I kind of assume when I'm talking to somebody who's very like on their this is this and it's only this, then I know we're not open to having conversation. And I know that, like I kind of was saying at the beginning, like they don't necessarily care about truth. They care about maintaining their tradition and they care about maintaining a status quo of what is comfortable to them. And it's easier to persecute other people to protect yourself and your beliefs. And so it tends to perpetuate that kind of power struggle and that conflict, and which is what a lot of times can give Christianity such a bad name.
Such a bad name.
For those who have researched or know lots of things and understand why there are concerns, there are people that you can talk to and they can say, well, there are certain underlying, like you said, certain underlying things or around love or around whatever. And you can have an understanding and you can realize that we're believing the same things without it necessarily being so like cut and dry on certain pieces. And so it just makes for a more like loving experience, which to me is what should be most important about it. If you believe in the concepts that are being taught.
And I think it's so cool that like having these open-minded conversations with people who might have a different faith than you. So one of my friends is Muslim, and her and I used to talk a lot about Jesus in the sense of, okay, well, here's what he did in my book. What about your book? And talking about like him and the similarities and the stories and some of the stories, even though the names might be different and some of the concepts, but just realizing
And most of it is the same.
Exactly. It just realizing that it's the same thing. It's just taught in a little bit different of a way. But then also, to your point earlier about the control, like one of the quotes that I heard that like really hit me is like the hunters write the history books. In the sense like the lions are dead. They don't get to do that. And so thinking about literally from our history books to our religious spiritual books, like who actually like wrote them and what could have been in mind. Like it's anybody who's like, nope, this is just the way it is. Like there's no other things and hasn't questioned. Like I'm like, I can't have a conversation with you about this.
And for Christianity, it's almost in entertainment and in media, it becomes satirical in that, like, you'll see all the skits about, like, the guy talking to random people on the street, and he'll read a passage, and they'll be like, oh, that's so violent, because he told them it was from the Quran, but it's a Bible passage. And, like, so it's like, yo, people really don't know. People don't know the Bible. People don't know what other books say. They don't know why they believe what they believe, and yet they faithfully go and they faithfully persecute in the name of those things. And so in this episode, this isn't to make anybody like want to change anything, or it's not to make anybody feel bad about what they practice. But my encouragement is just to be open in conversation, and also to dig in. And like, if you do a certain thing or you practice a certain way, look into it. If somebody were to ask you why, what would you say? I feel as though a trend when I look at like social and when I'm watching media is that I see a lot of younger people kind of moving away from religion in that term. And that's why I kind of keep saying spirituality and religion kind of differently, because at the same time, these people do feel some sense of spirituality or some sense of connection with a higher power, or they practice something or have their beliefs, but they're so hesitant, it seems, to say, I'm a Christian, or I practice this religion, because of all these connotations that we've kind of been bringing up. To you, what do you feel like is the difference between religion and spirituality, and just where are you with that?
I'm a millennial. I'm much more spiritual than I am religious. I was actually having a conversation with a friend about this. And she was like, well, why do you say that? And I'm like, well, because I don't trust religion in the sense of all of the things we've already talked about. Like, who wrote these books? Like, how did this change? Why are all of y'all doing different things, but it's the same book? And y'all are persecuting people that Jesus, like, or this person that you say that you believed in your version of Jesus, would have loved these people.
Is it fair to generalize? Is it fair to generalize?
I mean, I don't, no, not ever. But in my head.
Should you not be a Christian because a lot of people in history have said they were Christians and do bad things?
No, I can't. No. And I would never tell anybody to not do anything. I'm only on my own journey. And that's not why I'm not saying like I am a Christian, but I would say I'm much more spiritual than religious. Like I don't practice quote unquote the religion like Southern Baptist or Methodist or whatever. Like I'm not doing those things. For me, spiritual is having a relationship with God. Like I do believe that there's a higher power, and that's my relationship with him, like building that out, or her, and figuring out what that looks like for me and how to do that. But for me, it's like I was talking to someone who is atheist, and I was just like, for me in my life and all the stuff that I've been through and seen, and I just can't wake up in the morning and not feel like there's a higher power and not feel like, God doesn't exist. Like, I don't know. Yeah. It's just
That's interesting, because it's like, why? Why do we have to have something else? It's almost like we're always just trying to explain like why the world is the way it is, or trying to have something to justify the world. But it's like everything might not need to be
But I don't even think God justifies the world, because then people be like, well, if God really exists, why do bad things happen? Like, I feel like it can go both ways. Like, you can't use God to justify everything. But for me, I'm like, I was reading a study about how they were trying to, because, they're making robots for everything. It's about to be iRobot. Will Smith, hope you ready. But they were trying to make a robot that was like a hand, to be able to do all the functions that we have in our hands and all of those things. But they can't make it small enough, like to be the size of a hand and still have all the functionality. And I'm like, that is so cool, the way that our bodies just do things and grow. Like, I do believe that we were created. Like, I do. And it's like, well, science doesn't show that. Well, I can't prove that, but I still believe it. Like, there's just something like I can't do that. So I feel like it's both sides. Like, you can't use quote unquote God to justify everything, because humans make decisions and bad shit happens. But for me, I also just can't understand the concept of there not being a higher power. And I've been questioning that, like, well, okay, so when someone asks me, well, why are you spiritual? And why do you believe these things? Like, I'm still figuring that out. I don't have a lot of solid answers. And like you said, a lot of me would be like, well, faith. But it's like, okay, but what does that look like and how does that feel? I also feel like sometimes things don't always have to have the best, like a clear, concise definition or explanation, because I think it looks different for everybody.
Okay. I see a lot of younger people who mistrust the church in itself because of people are flawed. And so I ask you about not trusting it because of certain people, because that's what keeps a lot of people from religion and from church, which again, it's people are so flawed. Like I don't think that's a reason to not look into it or to try to understand it or to dive in and discover what works for you, if anything works for you. But that is what's discouraging, is to see so many people who are preying on their church or congregations, or to see somebody have so much and then teach messages of hope to the ones in front of them. One thing that discouraged me a lot about church was that I noticed a lot of the more southern churches I go to, and a lot of the churches that are filled with people from my communities, would always be lessons around things are bad, but they'll get better. It's always that. It was always that. Well, we're broke, but but God. And then, this is happening, but it'll be better. Like that's all you hear. And it's like, at what point is the abundance? Because God says we're supposed to live in abundance, but it's almost like that's where they were kind of instilling you are a servant because you're humble and you don't have, as if like that's how you should be, and this makes you a holier, and this makes you morally a better person because you're dealing with these things. And it's like, where is the talk about like you can have more, you should have more, here's how we do more, here's how we grow and build and make money and teach education and finance to our communities, et cetera. I wasn't really seeing those types of messages. And that clicked in my head to realize, I see why so many celebrities are people, the more money and the more you have, that's not a relevant message to a lot of people. It's almost like it's a message to poor people to keep them where they are.
Yep.
Or that it's very easy with that messaging to have a mindset that says, okay, this is okay, where you are. And so when you have like Scientology and like watching like those documentaries, I'm like, I see, because they're like, you can make things happen. You have the power to, actualize it and work towards it. You're seeing a totally different message. And I'm like, yeah, that makes sense for somebody who is doing things and moving forward. Like, I get why certain people wouldn't attach to that message and certain people would. And so just seeing like different ways messages are sent out, seeing the way people are actually living outside of the obvious bad things that some people are doing. But there are so many good as well. So again, it's about paying attention to both sides, because it's easy just to generalize the whole thing. And I don't think you should do that. But it's so far back into the history of it that you can't ignore it either. And so for me to talk to somebody who is deep into religion, the church, spirituality, however they want to call it, as long as they can acknowledge those things and not act like they're trying to sweep it under the rug, as long as they can acknowledge those issues while also saying, but this is what I believe, despite and through that, that's cool. That makes sense. But for everybody who acts like things aren't happening or like they're not certain issues,
we can't have this conversation.
Yeah, like we can't even talk about it. And so I think in tradition, like, it's just important to understand which ones are good, which ones not so good, which ones are just not progressive, which is a big thing. But some traditions are good. So like traditions within your family and like celebrations, and there's so many good things within your culture that I don't think tradition in itself is a bad thing. But like you said, the people who are writing these stories are the winners, and they tend to be the ones who carry on tradition. Yep. Slavery was a tradition. Supremacy is a tradition, and that's built into our traditions and our systems. Those aren't good. And so how do you remove the system, because religion is kind of a system too, removing that from the other ones that have kind of helped build it? It's really difficult.
It's very difficult. And I think, like, even though I say I'm like more spiritual, there are a lot of quote unquote religious like churches doing work in the community. So what I would say is, like, when looking at, it's really sad to see some of these really predatory mega churches, but there's also some of these mega churches that are actually doing a lot of stuff, like like creating like micro loan banks and things like that to get rid of all the fast payday loan systems. Like I know that was happening in Dallas with the church that I was going to with Pastor Freddie Haynes. Like he is actually in there, like, but he's also an activist. And so he also gets challenged a lot. Like, oh, well, he's not a real pastor because he's doing all these things. It's like, why can't he be a pastor and do all those things? And that's challenging people's traditional beliefs on what a pastor has to look like or be like or do. And so just thinking about what are some of those traditions in your life, and are you like, have you even thought about why you're doing the things that you're doing, why you're subscribing to the things that you do? And all for the sense, I think, of finding out what it means for you. Like you may find out that that is something you still want to do and want to carry on, and that's a beautiful thing. But also figuring out ways that you can also honor yourself better. So maybe that's not working out for you.
And again, with this topic, we discuss religion. So I'm interested in any ideas or thoughts that you want to hear further around religion, spirituality, et cetera, because there's so many different avenues that things could go. And I know I went off a little bit sometimes. I was trying to keep it into like around just the idea of like tradition and the why. So that was kind of like the goal and the focus of today's conversation. But if you are interested in different aspects of it or want to hear a conversation around it, or even if you want to, I guess I can only say for me, like if you wanted to hit me up and ask me about like what I do or why I do it, like I'm happy to do all of that as well. But again, this isn't to necessarily push anything on any person, but just to make you think.
Yeah, and just to open the door for a conversation. I think it's important to have these conversations to also like fortify your beliefs and fortify the reason why you're doing things. Like I said, I am very open and honest in the fact that I don't have a lot of solid answers because it's still something that I'm questioning and learning and growing about. And I have done a lot of research into religion and tradition specifically, and I'm still finding and creating what works for me.
So do we have a shout out this week? I didn't have one.
I don't have one either.
Okay. So for the question of the week this week, what's the smallest step I can take towards a big thing today, specifically?
What is the smallest step I can take towards a big thing today? To decide. I feel like there are a couple things I have up in the air that I'm like, I don't know, maybe this, maybe that, or like I'm working on like a couple of topics like for my business and things. It's like, okay, just decide. Because then that opens the door for you to move forward. If I iterate in the future, that's fine. But
to decide what though?
To just decide. Because right now I'm being a little bit indecisive on some things.
Oh, okay. About the specific thing. Just
exactly,
make a choice.
About this. Yeah, so just make a choice and move forward. Because a plan executed today is much better than a perfect one next week. And so just by moving forward and making that decision, like I said, that opens up the door for me to do a lot more instead of like in this holding pattern where I'm like, well, maybe it could be this and maybe it could be that, but it'll never be anything unless I actually decide and just start moving forward.
Right. Okay. For me, I would say a small step I can take towards a big thing. So like with all of my projects, I kind of break them down, or I try to, so that I can attack one piece at a time. So one thing that I can do is I'm working on a course in my business. And so we have 4 modules so far. And then like within each one, it's like broken down into like pieces that we're talking about. So what I've been trying to do and what I'm going to do today too is just take one of those pieces and then look for the research I can find around it, put it in the document. Like even if I just say I'm going to look at one module or look at one piece of a module and that's it, without just saying like work on the course, it's easier just to work on like that one little piece. So that's kind of how I've been trying to move with most of my projects, and that if I just break down like every little piece, I can just start with that one thing. But then I tend to kind of get in the zone. Like you said, the hardest part is like actually starting to do it. But if I tell myself what that specific thing is, then it's less to think about. So that's what I'm going to get done.
Yeah. So for you, what is the smallest step you can take towards a big thing today? Screenshot, let us know if you feel like sharing that. I'm also open for any spiritual conversation or questions you might have. So hit me up, let me know.
Appreciate it. And as always, have a good week.
Peace.